Next topic, action operators in the Flux class. So we've looked at doOnNext, we've looked at doOnError. Now we're going to take a look at doFinally and doOnComplete, which are two complementary operators that look very similar at first, but they are slightly different. Remember that action operators don't modify a flux, but instead use it for side effects. So we'll start out with doFinally. What doFinally does is it adds a behavior that's triggered after the flux terminates for any reason, be it success or failure. So I like to think of this as basically a destructor for a flux stream. It's not quite like that, but it's along the same lines. The parameter that's passed to this is called when the flux signals on error or on complete or is otherwise disposed by the downstream in some way. So this is triggered basically when something is done. And basically, as with all the other action operators like doOnNext and doOnSuccess, it's only, or doOnError, its only purpose is to have a side effect, which is to call back to this consumer. So it just has side effects. It's a callback. Doesn't modify anything. Now, what's interesting about this is it's always called regardless of whether you succeed or fail. And that's important to distinguish that between doFinally versus doOnComplete. And we'll take a look at that. So I like to think of it, as I said before, kind of like a C++ or a C# destructor, which in theory should always get called even if things go wrong. As always with action operators, it returns a new unchanged flux. The value can't change, the type can't change, we can just have the side effect, which usually involves cleaning things up. And in fact, we'll talk a bit about how it can be used in a second. So by default, it doesn't operate on any particular scheduler. It uses the current scheduler, unlike the interval method or operator, which by default runs in the parallel thread pool. Here's a very simple example, similar to what we looked at before. We make ourselves a new subscriber scheduler. So we want to run things in the subscriber. And we put a doFinally operator here so that when the stream is done, on the way out, we can dispose of that subscriber scheduler. Again, kind of like deleting it as you would in a destructor. So RxJava has something that works in essentially the same way, and you can do the same kinds of things. One thing to do with it is to always print something out when you're done with the stream so you know that it finished, whether it succeeded or failed. The Java Streams framework has no operators like doFinally. Instead, what you typically do with streams, because streams are inherently more synchronous, when you're done with the terminal operation in the stream, you'll get a result back, and then if there's any cleanup you need to do, you can do it right after that. For example, you could put something in a try-finally block and clean things up after the try-finally block returned. So let's talk about the doOnComplete operator. It's very similar to doFinally, with the main difference being that it's only triggered, its behavior is only triggered when the flux completes successfully, when the onComplete method is generated. What is passed in here is a functional interface that's a runnable that gives you just something to do. It doesn't give you a parameter. It just says, do this thing when you're done successfully. And again, it's only intended to have callbacks with some kind of side effect, like printing, displaying something. Those would be the main purposes for that. If things fail, onComplete is not called. So it's a no failure zone. And no failure in the sense it doesn't do anything if it fails. Not that it doesn't prevent failure. And it's important to contrast that with the behavior of doFinally. So we'll talk about that in a second. And you'll see how that can be used in different circumstances. It also returns a new Flux instance that isn't changed in any way, shape, or form, either by value or by type. It doesn't operate by default on any particular scheduler. It just runs in what the current scheduler is. And here's a simple example. We go ahead and do a bunch of stuff, and if we succeed, we want to display the results. Now, if we don't succeed, we probably want to do something else, but we want to only print these results when something has succeeded. So this is the side effect. We're just going to display the contents of our string builder we've been building up. RxJava has something exactly the same, surprise, surprise, that works the same way. And again, there's really no equivalent in Java streams because they're more inherently synchronous, and therefore we don't need this hook to be called. We can use a try finally block instead.